The 10th of December, 1941. Detroit, Michigan. The clang of metal against metal echoes through the sprawling factories, where workers, men and women, move like clockwork, welding, assembling, and shaping the tools of war. The air is thick with the smell of oil and steel, and the whir of machines fills every corner of the massive plant. Just days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States is gearing up for all-out war. The factory floors, once dedicated to civilian goods, have been transformed into an industrial powerhouse. The wheels of the American war machine are turning faster than ever before, cranking out tanks, planes, and munitions at a speed that seems almost impossible. In this cavernous space, one of the largest factories in Detroit, a group of engineers work tirelessly alongside production lines, adjusting blueprints, measuring the specifications of tanks, and overseeing the assembly of fighter planes. Colonel James Henry, an Army engineer overseeing the operation, stands in the center of the room, observing the immense scale of this new industrial endeavor. His face is tired, but there is no doubt about the determination in his eyes. The war has come home, and it's clear that victory won't be just about combat on the front lines. The American ability to outproduce the Axis will be just as decisive. Across the Atlantic, the world is already at war. Germany has swept through much of Europe, from Poland to France, and is now bogged down in a brutal conflict on the Eastern Front with the Soviet Union. While Germany's early advances seemed unstoppable, its factories have struggled to keep pace with the demands of total war. German war production, though efficient, is far behind in terms of scale when compared to the industrial behemoth that is emerging in the United States. In Berlin, the Third Reich is beginning to realize the full scale of the threat. As the war escalates, the need for a stronger industrial output becomes more apparent. The German military is fully aware of the enemy's industrial might. Yet, it remains to be seen whether they can bridge the widening gap between German engineering excellence and American mass production. Within the Ministry of Armaments, German engineers and industrial specialists are quietly given a new task: gather intelligence on how the Americans are able to churn out weapons, tanks, and planes in the sheer volumes now reaching the battlefield. The Axis powers have been accustomed to rapid military advancements, but this new wave of industrial might from the U.S. is unlike anything they have ever seen before. The wheels are already in motion. A team of engineers, led by Dr. Friedrich Müller, a seasoned veteran in Germany's war industry, will soon begin their journey to the U.S. to examine the enormous war factories firsthand. The mission is clear: study the scale and efficiency of American manufacturing and see if there is a way to replicate it or, at the very least, understand how to combat it. As the American war effort continues to gain momentum, the Axis is left to wonder, how long can their technological superiority stand against the relentless tide of U.S. industrial power? April 5, 1942. Aachen, Germany. The morning is cold and overcast as the engineers board a train bound for France. The team, led by Dr. Friedrich Müller, is quiet. The urgency of their mission weighs heavily on them. For weeks now, reports from the front and from military intelligence have made it clear the U.S. is ramping up its industrial capabilities at an unprecedented scale. In Berlin, a sense of quiet dread has begun to spread. The Nazis have conquered much of Europe, but they are now staring down an industrial behemoth they can't ignore. No longer can they rely solely on superior tactics or technology. America's capacity to churn out weapons, vehicles, and planes by the thousands is a new kind of weapon, one that Germany can't outmatch with its existing infrastructure. Dr. Müller stares out the train window as they travel through the misty German countryside. His mind races with the possibilities. How could they ever match the speed of American production? Could they even hope to replicate the efficiencies of the U.S. war factories? These were the questions that had been gnawing at him since the project was handed down from Berlin. He was an engineer by training, a man who believed in the power of innovation and design. But now, he was facing a crisis that no one had foreseen: how to fight a war against an enemy who could manufacture its way to victory. The train ride is long, and as they cross into France, the atmosphere becomes charged with anticipation. The German team's arrival at the American factory sites is as much a mission of intelligence as it is a measure of desperation. The factories they are about to inspect are already churning out thousands of units. But to Müller and his colleagues, these factories represent something more: a terrifying, almost incomprehensible industrial force. They first visit a massive munitions plant outside Paris. The complex sprawls across miles of land, with enormous concrete buildings that seem to stretch into the horizon. Trucks and trains deliver raw materials at all hours of the day and night, while workers move seamlessly through a factory that never stops. Müller and his team are escorted by American personnel who, though courteous, are tight-lipped about the specifics of the factory's operation. Still, the engineers can see enough with their own eyes. Rows upon rows of automated machines are assembling tanks, planes, and artillery at a speed and precision that leaves the German team stunned. Müller watches as workers load parts for a P-47 Thunderbolt onto a conveyor belt. Within hours, a nearly complete plane is in the air, being tested and prepped for battle. It is an assembly line unlike anything he's ever seen. Everything runs with a mechanical precision, every task timed and perfected, every worker contributing to a single, unstoppable flow. This is... Müller pauses, searching for words. This is something else entirely. This is not just industry. This is a war machine. They have turned mass production into an art. He stands frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of what is happening before him. The assembly lines are not just large. They are fast, efficient, and highly coordinated. The sheer scale of American industrial output defies anything that Germany's engineers had ever believed possible. The Germans had always prided themselves on precision, on high-quality engineering that required time and care. But here, the machines don't stop. They work 24/7, pushing out aircraft, tanks, and trucks in numbers that are difficult to grasp. Across the factory floor, another engineer, Heinrich Kraus, is taking measurements and scribbling notes furiously. They don't just assemble things, they optimize the process. Every detail is accounted for: the machines, the workers, even the flow of raw materials. It's like a military operation in itself, Kraus murmurs, shaking his head in disbelief. Müller's thoughts are heavy. This is more than just production. This is a war strategy. The U.S. has turned its entire industrial base into a weapon. The Germans are not allowed to witness every part of the operation, but what they see is enough. They understand now. The United States is not just building weapons. They are outproducing any single enemy anywhere in the world. The sheer speed and scale of the American factories will be impossible for Germany to match with their existing infrastructure. As the team leaves the factory, Müller is quiet, deep in thought. The reality of what they've just witnessed is setting in. The United States isn't just fighting a war, it's waging an industrial campaign that no one, not even the Germans, can keep up with. "We cannot replicate this," Müller says under his breath, as he stares at the factory's towering smokestacks fading into the distance. "And we are already too far behind." The engineers return to their hotel in Paris that night, weary but with minds racing. The data, the measurements, and the observations have been recorded, but they already know the truth. No amount of German ingenuity will be enough to close the gap. The American industrial engine is too powerful, too vast. They are about to bring this grim news back to Berlin. July 18, 1942. Detroit, Michigan. The hot, sticky air of summer hangs heavily over the factory district as the German engineers step off the train. Detroit, the heart of America's industrial revolution, is now fully dedicated to the war effort. Everywhere they look, there's evidence of total mobilization. Trucks loaded with raw materials rumble past on their way to nearby factories, while cranes lift steel beams and pieces of machinery toward the open sky. The scale of the operation is immediately overwhelming. The engineers, Dr. Müller and his team, walk through the streets toward a massive assembly plant, each step carrying the weight of their mission. They are here to observe, to gather intelligence, and most importantly, to understand how the United States has turned its industrial might into a force capable of reshaping the battlefield. The Germans had always thought of themselves as the best in engineering, the masters of quality over quantity, but what lay before them in Detroit was something they could not have anticipated. Inside the factory, the atmosphere is electric. The sounds of hammers, welding, and the hum of large machines fill the air. Workers, both men and women, move fluidly across the vast floor, assembling parts and directing large equipment as if they were part of a carefully orchestrated dance. There is no hesitation in their movements. The machines that churn out tanks and planes appear to operate with a kind of relentless precision that Germany's best factories simply can't match. Dr. Müller looks up at the giant assembly line, where a massive Sherman tank is being built. Within minutes, a tank hull is transformed from a pile of raw steel into a partially assembled vehicle, all with machine-like efficiency. Each piece of armor is welded into place, every track system smoothly aligned, and the turret mechanism ready to be tested. Mueller's hand trembles slightly as he writes down his observations in his notebook. He is struck by the scope and speed of this operation. We couldn't build this in Germany, not even in our best factories, Mueller admits, his voice low as he surveys the floor. Not at this pace, and not with this level of output. Across the factory floor, another German engineer, Heinrich Krauss, is taking detailed measurements of the manufacturing process. He stares wide-eyed at a P-47 Thunderbolt fighter plane, which is being assembled at an astonishing rate. The planes are moving down the assembly line so quickly that the engineers can hardly believe it. Workers move from station to station, each one carefully contributing to the construction of the aircraft, from the fuselage to the engines. The pace is relentless, and within hours, a nearly complete fighter is on the runway, ready for flight testing. How do they keep up with this speed? Krauss mutters to himself, his pencil moving furiously across the notepad. They don't stop, Mueller responds, his eyes glued to the workers as they continue their labor. It's not just efficiency, it's sheer volume. They are producing machines at a rate we've never seen before. As the German team continues their tour of the plant, it becomes clear that the Americans have mastered more than just the technology of war. They've perfected a system of mass production that transcends traditional factory work. Machines are constantly in motion, shifting raw materials seamlessly from one stage to the next. Even the workers themselves seem like extensions of the machines moving swiftly, with a kind of synchronization that makes the entire factory seem more like an automated system than a human-run operation. They come across another section of the plant, where bombers are being assembled. The workers here are focused but unhurried, as though they are part of something much larger than the task at hand. Each worker's role is narrow, specialized, but the sum of their efforts produces something far greater. From start to finish, an entire fleet of bombers is slowly taking shape in the vast hangars of the plant, and it's all happening at a speed that seems incomprehensible to the German engineers. Thousands of these planes are leaving these factories every month, Krauss says, shaking his head. They are flooding the market with more than we can handle. It's not just about quality, it's about volume. Mueller nods, his mind racing. He's seen the German factories, and he knows that even with all of their precision, they cannot compete with the American scale of operation. Germany, despite its sophisticated weaponry and engineering, simply cannot match the relentless production power that is unfolding before them. The United States is not only outproducing the Axis, it is creating weapons at a speed that makes their own efforts seem like a drop in the ocean. As the day draws to a close, Müller and his team stand at the edge of the factory floor, watching the constant churn of machines and workers. The factory itself seems alive, almost like a living organism, and they are witnessing the full scale of American industrial might for the first time. We cannot compete, Müller says quietly. We may have the best engineering, but they have the resources and the ability to produce far beyond anything we could ever imagine. Krauss looks down at his notes, frustration evident on his face. We've built the best tanks, the best aircraft, but they are building them faster than we can even dream of. The engineers exchange glances, their expressions filled with realization. They know the war has just entered a new phase, one where quantity and speed, not just quality, will determine the victor. The United States has found a way to combine its immense resources with cutting-edge industrial technology, and in doing so, it has created an unstoppable force. September 25th, 1942, Berlin, Germany. The mood in the Ministry of Armaments is somber as Dr. Müller and his team sit around a long table, reviewing their findings. The factory reports, measurements, and notes are spread out before them, but the weight of their conclusions presses down on them all. Dr. Müller, having reviewed the material one last time, looks up, his expression hard. The mission had been clear: understand how the United States has turned its industrial base into a weapon, and assess whether it is something that Germany can overcome. What they discovered in Detroit, however, has shaken them to their core. Mueller's voice is low, almost a whisper as he speaks. We've seen it. We know now. The U.S. is outproducing us in every way possible. We cannot compete with the scale of their industrial output. Heinrich Krauss, one of the engineers who had accompanied Mueller on the mission, is pacing the room. His hands are folded behind his back, and his eyes are narrowed. I kept telling myself, there must be a way, that we could find a flaw in their system. But there isn't. What they're doing, producing tanks, planes, munitions, at this speed it's unprecedented. We simply cannot match it. The other engineers sit quietly, absorbing the enormity of what they've learned. Germany had prided itself on its quality, its superior technology, and engineering. But now, it faced an entirely new enemy. Not just an army, but a factory that never stopped, one that produced more weaponry than the Axis could hope to use. Dr. Müller continues, his voice rising with frustration. We knew that the United States had the resources. We knew they had the raw materials. But what we saw in Detroit goes beyond anything we could have imagined. They've taken mass production and transformed it into a military weapon. It's not about precision anymore, it's about volume. And they have no limits. He leans back in his chair, massaging his temples. The Americans don't just produce tanks or planes, they produce them at a pace that makes us seem like we're standing still. For every tank we build, they build 5. For every fighter we produce, they produce 20. They've shifted the entire nature of the war. It's not just the soldiers who will win this war, it's the factories. The silence in the room is heavy. The engineers, once proud of their nation's industrial might, now realize they are playing catch-up. Germany's war economy, already strained by the demands of the Eastern Front and the battle in North Africa, simply does not have the capacity to outproduce the United States. The gap is widening, and they have no answer to it. We've been focusing on quality, says Krauss, his voice tight with disbelief. We've built some of the most advanced weaponry the world has ever seen, but we've been doing it at the expense of speed. Meanwhile, the U.S. has turned its entire economy into a war machine. It's not just one factory, it's thousands. It's a constant flow, and they are unstoppable. Dr. Müller's eyes flicker with a hint of resignation. We can no longer out-engineer them. We cannot match the scale of their production. Even if we use all our resources, they will simply outpace us. The United States has created an industrial juggernaut, and we are too far behind to catch up. The team falls into a long silence. There is no arguing against the facts. No amount of German engineering brilliance can compensate for the sheer scale and speed of American production. The Germans had relied on their ingenuity, their technological superiority, but they now face the brutal truth that the United States has turned the tables. After several moments, Heinrich Krauss speaks again, his voice hollow. This isn't just a production issue. This is a strategic shift. The U.S. has entered the war as an industrial power, not just a military one, and we don't have a way to stop it. Dr. Müller nods solemnly. The war is no longer just about tactics or battlefield strategy. It's about logistics. It's about who can produce faster, who can send more soldiers, more weapons, more supplies. And right now, the United States is winning that battle. As the meeting comes to a close, the engineers gather their notes and reports, but the sense of defeat lingers in the room. They have seen firsthand the staggering scale of American production. The future of the war, as they now realize, is no longer in their hands. The question no longer remains, how do we win the war? It is now, how do we compete against an enemy that doesn't just fight with its army, but with an entire industrial machine? October 18th, 1942, Aachen, Germany. The gray skies of Aachen reflect the mood in the war room of the Reich Ministry of Armaments. Dr. Müller, Krauss, and the rest of the engineering team have returned from their mission in the United States. After weeks of compiling reports, measurements, and analysis, they now face General Albert Speer, the Third Reich's Minister of Armaments. The mood is heavy with the awareness that the information they've gathered will have far-reaching consequences. Speer, usually calm and collected, is on edge as Müller presents their findings. The general listens intently, his face unreadable, as Müller outlines the overwhelming scale of U.S. industrial production. It's a difficult pill to swallow for the men and women who have spent their careers ensuring Germany's technological and industrial superiority. Yet, even as Müller speaks, they all know the gap is too wide to close. It is not just their resources, but their ability to mobilize them at an unprecedented scale. Müller begins, his voice steady but filled with frustration. We saw factories that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, producing aircraft, tanks, artillery, mass production of a scale we could never hope to match. The United States is not just making weapons, they are making them faster and in greater quantities than we can even keep track of. This isn't just a problem, it is the problem. Speer shifts in his chair, the pressure of the situation weighing heavily on him. We have known about their industrial strength for some time, but how did they do it? How have they turned their entire industrial base into a military weapon? He asks, trying to make sense of the situation. Kraus, who had been quiet until now, speaks up. They have perfected a system, General. It's not just about having the materials. It's about the integration of labor, technology, and logistics. We saw how their factories move like clockwork, every piece, every worker, every machine, optimized for speed and efficiency. They have developed systems to move raw materials from one stage to the next without delay, and the workers are a part of that system. Müller continues. It's not just their factories, it's their entire economy. The entire country is mobilized for war. Every sector, from transportation to manufacturing to logistics, is synchronized and working toward one goal, winning the war. Speer leans forward, his face tightening as he processes the information. And we cannot compete with this? He asks, his voice tinged with disbelief. The room is silent. Müller knows there is no easy answer. No, General. Even if we shift all of our efforts to mass production, we cannot match their speed, their scale, their efficiency. The United States has created a system that is fundamentally different from ours, and they are producing far more than we can hope to keep up with. Speer nods slowly, his mind working through the implications. The realization hits him hard. Germany's war effort, which had been based on high-quality, precision engineering, is simply not sustainable against an adversary capable of producing at a scale that dwarfs their own. This will change the way we approach the war, Speer mutters to himself. We cannot afford to keep relying solely on our superior technology. We need a new plan. Müller looks up, meeting Speer's gaze. We need to adapt, General. But we must also understand that the United States has entered this war not as just another nation. It is a superpower with an industrial base that is already capable of outproducing us. They will keep coming, wave after wave, and we will struggle to keep up. The German engineers fall silent. They've done all they can. The conclusion is undeniable. The United States has found a way to win the war through its industrial capacity, and Germany, despite its engineering brilliance, cannot keep pace. As the meeting comes to a close, Speer stands, his face dark with contemplation. We must rethink everything, he says quietly. This isn't just about tanks and planes anymore. This is about who can keep their factories running, who can keep supplying their armies, who can sustain the longest. November 15th, 1942, Berlin, Germany. In the coming weeks, Speer and the High Command meet in secret to discuss a new strategy. The shift is dramatic. Instead of focusing on the production of high-quality, cutting-edge technology, the Germans will be forced to consider mass production techniques similar to those used by the United States. They will have to increase the output of their weapons, even if it means sacrificing some degree of precision and perfection. The focus will now be on quantity over quality, something unthinkable just a few months earlier. This shift in strategy, however, doesn't come without its own set of challenges. The German workforce is already stretched thin, and the logistics required to implement mass production on the scale seen in the U.S. would take years to establish. Speer and the engineering team know that they are playing a dangerous game, one where every decision will have major consequences on the battlefield. Müller, who had once believed that German engineering superiority could win the war, now sees a different picture. The realization that they cannot compete with the United States' industrial capacity leaves him with a sense of foreboding. Germany, he understands now, is in a race against time. The longer the war drags on, the more entrenched the American industrial juggernaut becomes, We must adapt or be left behind, Müller says in a final report to the High Command. But even as he writes those words, he knows the truth. Germany's chance at winning the war lies not in engineering or tactics, but in the ability to outproduce their enemies, and the United States has already won that race. January 12th, 1943. Berlin, Germany. The winter chill in Berlin is biting, but it's nothing compared to the cold realization settling over Germany's war efforts. The decision to shift from precision engineering to mass production is now in full swing. Speer and his associates are working relentlessly to reorganize the German war economy, but the scale of the task is overwhelming. In factories, assembly lines are being restructured, while workers are being reassigned to different tasks, often with little training in the new mass production processes. It is clear that the Germans are trying to adapt to a system that is fundamentally alien to their industrial culture. Dr. Müller watches from the sidelines, his sense of foreboding growing with each passing day. The change is difficult to implement, and it is proving slower than anticipated. Even if they could increase their production output, it will take months, if not years, before they can even approach the level of efficiency that the U.S. has already achieved. And in that time, the American war machine continues to churn, relentlessly producing vast quantities of weapons, vehicles, and planes at a rate that leaves Germany in the dust. In the factories of Berlin and the Ruhr Valley, things are changing, but not fast enough. The effort to adapt has strained resources, and quality has suffered. Some engineers are questioning whether the new focus on quantity is worth the loss of precision that had once made Germany's military technology the envy of the world. Tanks and aircraft are being rushed off the lines, but they are not the finely crafted machines that Germany's engineers had once been proud of. Instead, they are crude, mass-produced imitations of the designs that had once been cutting-edge. Krauss, one of the engineers who had accompanied Müller on the mission to the United States, is at his breaking point. The factory floors are chaotic, and workers are now producing weapons in conditions that feel more like a desperate scramble than a finely tuned industrial operation. "We've sacrificed everything we believed in," Krauss says, pacing the factory floor. "We have abandoned the principles that made our weapons the best in the world. And for what? To keep up with the Americans? We're not even close." Müller agrees, but there's little he can say. The facts are clear. Germany's once thriving industrial war machine is now operating in overdrive, but it is still woefully behind. They can produce more, but the quality is suffering, and their factories are ill-equipped to handle the scale needed. Worse, the Americans are still expanding their capabilities. New factories are opening across the United States every month, producing even more advanced weapons. The gap is widening with each passing day. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States' industrial power is only growing stronger. The American factories are producing tens of thousands of tanks, planes, and artillery pieces each month. The U.S. Army receives everything it needs in massive quantities, while Germany struggles just to meet the demands of its front lines. While Germany's factories were beginning to adapt, it is becoming painfully clear that the U.S. had a head start, a massive one, that the Germans could never hope to close. In Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his advisors sit comfortably in the knowledge that the American industrial effort is unstoppable. The United States has transformed itself into the world's arsenal, and its ability to outproduce any enemy is the cornerstone of its war strategy. The relentless flow of supplies, combined with the manpower of a nation fully mobilized for war, has put the Axis powers on the defensive. What was once a war fought with technology and tactics is now a war of endurance, and America's industrial capacity is proving to be the ultimate weapon. March 3rd, 1943. Eastern Front, Stalingrad. On the frozen battlefields of the Eastern Front, German soldiers, already suffering from the bitter winter, are faced with a new reality. They no longer have the superior firepower or equipment they once relied on. The tanks, planes, and artillery that had been the backbone of their success are now becoming less reliable, often due to the rush to meet production deadlines. Meanwhile, the Americans are sending wave after wave of freshly built tanks and bombers, reinforced with the latest technologies, into the battlefields of the Pacific and Europe. It is not just about winning battles anymore, it's about who can sustain the longest, who can fight the hardest, and who has the most equipment. General Erwin Rommel, fighting in North Africa, feels the change. His forces, once among the most formidable on the battlefield, are running low on supplies. Tanks that were once a symbol of German military dominance are now outnumbered by the new American Shermans and British Matildas. And even more devastating, the U.S. air superiority is leaving the Luftwaffe in the dust. Rommel's famed tactics of maneuver and surprise are no match for the overwhelming number of planes and tanks now arriving daily in Allied hands. Meanwhile, back in Germany, the full scale of the U.S. industrial effort becomes a bitter reality for Dr. Müller and his colleagues. As the war stretches on, it is clear that no amount of German ingenuity can outpace the combined strength of American resources. The realization that Germany is now fighting a war it cannot win, simply because it cannot match the sheer scale of U.S. industrial output, becomes more and more evident. The balance of power is shifting. May 22, 1943, Berlin, Germany. Müller stands alone in his office, staring at a wall full of production charts and strategic plans. The last few months have been filled with meetings and endless reports about how Germany will adapt, how they will push forward. But the truth is now unavoidable. Despite the changes, despite the efforts to ramp up production, Germany cannot compete with the U.S. industrial powerhouse. The war, as Müller now understands it, is no longer just about military strategy, it is about who can outlast whom. The United States has proven that industrial power, not just superior weaponry, will win the war. The Axis powers, despite their technical brilliance, are outgunned, outproduced, and outmanned. For the first time, Müller feels the full weight of his realization. There is no escaping the industrial giant that is the United States. And as the war grinds on, with each passing month, Germany's hope for victory fades. July 4, 1943. Washington, D.C. On the steps of the Capitol, the United States celebrates another Independence Day, but this year, the air is charged with a different kind of energy. The country has not only fought to preserve its independence, but has, through its unparalleled industrial might, turned the tide of a world war. The production lines that have driven the war effort planes, tanks, trucks, and artillery continue to churn out supplies at an unrelenting pace. The U.S. has transformed from a nation focused on consumerism into the world's undisputed arsenal of democracy. As the United States celebrates its national holiday, the rest of the world watches, realizing that the future of the war, and perhaps the future of global power, has already been decided. In Berlin, however, the mood is grim. The reality of Germany's situation has become undeniable. Despite the ingenuity of German engineers and the bravery of their soldiers, Germany's ability to sustain the war effort has been broken by the sheer scale of American production. With each passing month, the Allies continue to receive reinforcements and fresh weapons, while the Germans, despite their best efforts to increase production, struggle to meet the demands of their front lines. In the factories, the push for mass production continues, but it is becoming clear that Germany's newfound strategy is too little, too late. Their factories are still playing catch-up, and the quality of their weapons is declining. In contrast, American factories are producing vast quantities of sophisticated equipment, and they are doing it with efficiency and speed that Germany can only envy. Meanwhile, in the skies over Europe and the Pacific, the U.S. Air Force has achieved complete air superiority. American bombers rain destruction down on German cities and industrial centers, while American fighter planes, with their superior speed and firepower, sweep the skies clear of the Luftwaffe. The American industrial machine has produced thousands of aircraft and vehicles that the Germans cannot hope to match, and the tide of the war has shifted irrevocably in the Allies' favor. August 15th, 1943, Normandy, France. The Allied invasion of Normandy is underway. The beaches are strewn with the wreckage of German defenses and Allied forces, supported by an unending supply of tanks, trucks, and aircraft, press inland with relentless force. The German defenders, though brave, are no match for the overwhelming numbers and firepower of the Allies. It's not just the soldiers on the ground who are fighting, the machinery of war itself is fighting on the side of the United States. The invasion is a stark reminder of the power of U.S. industrial production. As the Allies push through France, the logistics of supply tanks, artillery, food, and medical supplies are flowing in from American factories faster than the Germans can destroy them. The industrial power of the United States has created an unstoppable momentum, one that is now crushing the Axis powers under the weight of its production. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, watching the progress of the invasion, understands the significance of what is happening. "We are not just winning on the battlefield," he says. "We are winning because we can keep fighting. We can keep supplying our soldiers, our tanks, our planes. We can keep going forever, and they cannot." In Berlin, the reality of defeat has settled in. The German High Command watches in despair as the Allies continue their advance across Europe, pushing the Germans back at every turn. The factories that were once the heart of the German war effort are now failing to produce the weapons needed to stop the Allied onslaught. In the months leading up to the invasion, the shift to mass production had barely begun to take shape, and it was too little to overcome the immense industrial superiority of the United States. November 2nd, 1943, Berlin, Germany. By now, the effects of U.S. industrial power are impossible to ignore. As the Germans struggle to hold their ground on multiple fronts, the Allies continue to push forward with fresh supplies from America. The war effort is no longer about superior tanks or advanced technologies. It is about who can keep their factories running, who can produce the most, and who can sustain the longest. Dr. Müller, now disillusioned and exhausted, attends a meeting with General Speer and other high-ranking officials in the Reich Ministry of Armaments. The room is heavy with the knowledge that the war is lost. The industrial engine that the Germans had hoped to emulate has crushed them, and there is no escaping the truth. Germany's war economy is outclassed by the relentless power of U.S. industrial production. The Americans have achieved what was once thought impossible. They have turned their industrial capacity into a weapon capable of overwhelming the Axis powers. The sheer volume of their output has shifted the balance of the war, leaving Germany unable to keep up. "We have failed," Müller says quietly, his voice hollow with resignation. "Our weapons, our soldiers, our strategies, they were never enough. The Americans don't just fight with tanks and planes, they fight with an entire economy behind them. We couldn't compete with that. And now, it's too late." December 1943. The endgame. By the time winter settles across Europe, the Allied victory is all but assured. The United States has outproduced the Axis, sending waves of fresh soldiers, tanks, and planes into battle with unrelenting frequency. In contrast, the German war machine is exhausted, its production lines strained, and its manpower stretched thin. The Axis powers have failed to overcome the industrial juggernaut that is the United States. Germany's attempt to shift its focus to mass production is a valiant but futile effort. The sheer scale and efficiency of U.S. production have proven to be the deciding factor in the war. While Germany's engineers, soldiers, and generals fought bravely, they were up against a force they could never outmatch. As the war winds toward its inevitable conclusion, the legacy of the U.S. industrial machine remains one of the most significant factors in the defeat of the Axis. The American capacity to produce weapons at an extraordinary rate and to supply its forces with an endless stream of resources has proven to be the decisive factor in the war. For Dr. Müller and his colleagues, the realization comes too late. The lessons of industrial power have been learned the hard way, in the rubble of cities and the aftermath of war. The war has not been won on the battlefield, but in the factories of Detroit, Chicago, and Pittsburgh, where the true weapon of victory was forged.